Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start, as usual, with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, hello everyone and welcome to the Sutta class. Before we start, I just wanted to make one small announcement. Next week, there's not going to be a Sutta class because I have another commitment. So we will cancel next week and then meet again in 2 weeks. But for today, we will continue reading the Assalāyana Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 93. We started this sutta last week, and this is a sutta where there is a person who thinks that they are better than everybody else, a very arrogant person, very conceited person. And we have talked already last time a little bit about this, how even in modern times, this is something that is very, very common, that there is a group of people that makes these divisions between other people, between themselves and others. For example, we see this in racism, we see this in nationalism, where people of one country or one culture think that they're better than everybody else. Of course, there is misogyny, there is homophobia, transphobia, ableism, ageism, you name it, whatever groups there can be, people will split people up and think that one group is better than the other. And then think they themselves are so great and so pure and so evolved and so much higher than everybody else. And so this is a sutta where somebody thinks in that way and where the Buddha engages with that kind of person. And so last time we read the first half of this sutta, and the main speaker, of course, next to the Buddha is a Brahmin student called Assalāyana. And as we saw in the beginning of the sutta, Assalāyana actually himself is not fully convinced of the view that he has to represent in the sutta here. He is forced by his peers because of peer pressure to debate with the Buddha, even though he thinks that the Buddha is actually right. So because his friends and companions and his teachers and highly esteemed Brahmins of his community keep on pestering him again and again and again, and don't let this go. Eventually, he is pressured so much that he actually accepts the challenge and debates with the Buddha. And as we have seen the last time, the debate was very one-sided. The Buddha presented a lot of counter-arguments to debunk his claim. And the only thing that Assalāyana actually said is, I still stubbornly cling to my claim. And he never came up with any kind of argument to defend himself. So last time we read quite a few arguments of the Buddha explaining why this is total nonsense to believe that one group is higher than the others. In this case, of course, the group of the Brahmins claimed that they are higher than the others, that they are more pure, that they are born from the highest God, the God that is called Brahma, that they are the offspring of Brahma, and that they are more pure and more fairer and just higher beings than all the other castes of India. And of course, the Buddha has debunked that in many ways. And then, as I mentioned, Assalāyana never came up with any counter-argument. And we read until paragraph 12. And at this point now, the Buddha changes his strategy because obviously he's not getting anywhere. And so we will now see what the Buddha does. So we continue reading at paragraph 12 in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. This is also paragraph 12 of Bhante Sujato's translation on Sutta Central. So I put a link in the live chat if you want to read along. with Bhante Sujato's translation. So at this point, the Buddha has just presented another argument why this is nonsense, and Assalāyana, the Brahmin student, says the following: although Master Gotama says this, still the Brahmins think thus. Brahmins are the highest caste. And let's see what else they say. Brahmins are the highest caste. Those of any other caste are inferior. Brahmins are the fairest caste. Those of any other caste are dark. Only Brahmins are purified, not non-Brahmins. Brahmins alone are the sons of Brahma, the offspring of Brahma, born of his mouth, born of Brahma, created by Brahma, heirs of Brahma. And then the Buddha says, what do you think, Assalāyana? Suppose a noble youth were to cohabit with a Brahmin girl, and a son was born from their cohabitation. Should a son born from a noble youth and a Brahmin girl be called a noble after the father, or a Brahmin after the mother? He could be called both, Master Gotama. What do you think, Assalāyana? Suppose a Brahmin youth here were to cohabit with a noble girl, and a son were to be born from their cohabitation. Should the son born from a Brahmin youth and a noble girl be called a noble after the mother, or a Brahmin after the father? He could be called both, Master Gotama. So here now, the Buddha changes his strategy. He actually asks questions of Assalāyana, so that Assalāyana actually has to respond and actually has to reflect and actually has to present his own point of view, so that he is a little bit more engaged in the debate, and so that he himself comes to a conclusion and makes a statement. Because obviously when the Buddha makes all the statements, Assalāyana just stubbornly clings to his view, and the Buddha has had no way of coming through so far, or of getting through so far. And so the Buddha asks the question, let's say that two castes or people from two castes have a child together, then what does that mean for the child? To which caste does the child actually belong? And here in this case, the Buddha takes the example of a Brahmin, either a Brahmin man or a Brahmin woman, and then a noble, either man or woman. And of course, as I explained last time already, the word noble here doesn't mean that this is a stream enterer or anything higher than that, an arahant or something. Of course, this refers to the caste of the Khatyas, so the aristocratics, or the nobles, translated as nobles here. So this is one of the other castes of India. And of course, there were four castes in the Buddha's time: the Brahmins and the Khatyas, or nobles, were the two higher castes, and then the two lower castes were the merchants and the workers. And in this case, the Buddha takes the example of the Brahmins and the nobles, but obviously this applies to any kind of caste. So let's say people from two castes have a child together. So to which caste does the child belong? And it's interesting here that Assalāyana doesn't say, oh, it always follows the father because it's a patriarchal culture, or it always follows the mother because the mother is the one who actually gives birth to the child. And Assalāyana actually acknowledges that this could be both. So there is a gray area, and not everybody neatly fits into one of the two categories. And obviously this applies to any kind of category that we artificially create in our mind to make these divisions between people. So whether that is racism, obviously people can be mixed race, or whether this is nationalism, obviously people can have parents of two different nations, of two different countries, or people can actually change their country during their lifetime. So you can have a passport of one country, and then when you have lived a while in another country, obviously you can become a citizen of that other country, and then you have just changed from one box into the other box. Or of course you could have multiple passports of multiple countries. And so not everybody neatly fits into those boxes and those categories that we artificially create. So again, those categories don't really make sense. You can't say one is better than the other, because some people are both and some people are neither. So for this kind of black and white thinking to work, everything in the world has to be black and white. But actually, most things in the world are pretty much in a gray area. So, and here in this case, again, it's very interesting that it is quite equal between men and women. The caste doesn't follow just the father, or it doesn't follow just the mother, but it could actually be both. And so in this case now, the Brahmin Assalāyana has to acknowledge that there can be people in the world that could potentially be Brahmin, but could also be any other caste. So you can't say this is the highest caste or the fairest caste, because that child can actually be a noble and a Brahmin at the same time. And then the Buddha continues. What do you think, Assalāyana? Suppose a mare were to be mated with a male donkey, and a foal were to be born as a result. Should the foal be called a horse after the mother, or a donkey after the father? It is a mule, Master Gotama, since it does not belong to either kind. I see the difference in this last case, but I see no difference in either of the former cases. So this is a very interesting example here now. So now the Buddha takes the example of two animals, a horse and a donkey. They have a baby together. And so that baby, that foal, is that foal a horse or is it a donkey? And in this case, obviously, it's neither a horse nor a donkey, but it's something different. It's a mule. And Assalāyana acknowledges that it's a mule and it does not belong to either kind. So it's not a horse and it is not a donkey. It's something separate. And Assalāyana acknowledges that among animals, this can happen. So he says there is a difference in this last case. But he sees no difference in the former cases. So in the cases of humans, having babies together, there is no difference. The baby is always a human. And it's not like with animals where two different species can create something that is different. Obviously, among humans, we are all the same species. No matter which culture we are from, no matter which background we have, we're all the same species. So all the children are just human children, and you can't really see a difference there. And I think that's a very important step that the Buddha takes here to get Assalāyana to acknowledge this, that among humans, there is no difference. And this is actually quite an interesting point in the suttas. This is also found in other suttas where the Buddha very expressly states that among animals, there can be such differences, but obviously among humans, we're all the same species. There's no difference. And then the Buddha comes up with a new example. So now he's leading Assalāyana slowly on to acknowledge more and more things and going further and further away from his original view. So now he's leading him on to a new realization. And the Buddha says, what do you think, Assalāyana? Suppose there were two Brahmin students who were brothers, born of the same mother, one studious and acute, and one neither studious nor acute. Which of them would Brahmins feed first at a funeral feast, or at the ceremonial milk rice offering, or at the sacrificial feast, or at a feast for guests? On such occasions, Brahmins would feed first the one who was studious and acute, Master Gotama. For how could what is given to one who is neither studious nor acute bring great fruit? So now the Buddha takes the example of two brothers, and they are biological brothers. They have the same father and also the same mother. Of course, back then, Brahmins sometimes could have multiple wives. So people could be brothers but not have the same mother. So stepbrothers, basically. But in this case, they have the same father, the same mother. So basically, what the Buddha is trying to say is all other things being equal, it's two brothers, exactly the same circumstances, but one is smart and the other one is not that smart. And also one has learned much and the other one hasn't learned much. So if the Brahmins have a kind of special ceremony or a special occasion, which one would be fed first, or which one should take the food first? And obviously, usually the person taking the food first or the person opening the banquet basically would be somebody who is highly esteemed, highly respected. So the first portion of the meal should go to a highly respected, highly venerated person. And so in this case, all other things being equal, the Brahmins prefer somebody who is smart and who has learned much over somebody who is not that smart and who is also not learned that much. And then the Buddha continues, what do you think, Assalāyana? Suppose there were two Brahmin students who were brothers, born of the same mother, one studious and acute, but immoral and of bad character, and one neither studious nor acute, but virtuous and of good character. Which of them would Brahmins feed first at a funeral feast, or at a ceremonial milk rice offering, or at a sacrificial feast, or at a feast for guests? On such occasions, Brahmins would feed first the one who was neither studious nor acute, but virtuous and of good character, Master Gautama. For how could what is given to one who is immoral and of bad character bring great fruit? So now the Buddha expands the simile and he says, well, one person is very smart, but it's a really bad person. They're immoral. They do bad things all the time. And the other person is not that smart, but they are a really good person. So of these two, which ones would the Brahmins venerate more? Which one would they esteem more? Which one should take the first bite of the food, basically? Which one should open the banquet? And then Assalāyana says, well, obviously the virtuous person is the higher one. Even though he or she is not that learned, even though they're not that learned, they are obviously higher than somebody who is very smart, but who is an immoral person. And then the Buddha now replies, first, Assalāyana, you took your stand on birth. And after that, you took your stand on scriptural learning. And after that, you have come to take your stand on the very ground of that purification is for all four castes, as I describe it. So now the Buddha says, well, first you claimed that the highest person is based on birth. So Brahmins, because of their birth as Brahmins, are higher than everybody else. Then you changed that and you said that actually the highest is somebody who is smart and intelligent and has learned a lot. And then you changed that and you said the highest person is somebody who is virtuous. And finally, you have actually agreed with me, because I also said that is exactly the reason why I say that purification is for all four castes, because in all four castes, people can be virtuous and people can train in morality, and then based on that, obviously train in the higher virtues, such as the higher development of the mind, the purification of the mind. So in this roundabout way, basically, the Buddha has got Assalāyana to agree with him that the important thing is not birth, but the important thing is actually virtue. And virtue is also what the Buddha's Dhamma is based on. And when this was said, the Brahmin student Assalāyana sat silent and dismayed, with shoulders drooping and head down, glum and without response. Knowing this, the Blessed One said to him. So Assalāyana at this point feels that he has been defeated. He has no reply to make. He himself has basically proven, because he himself gave the replies, he himself gave the answers, he himself has proven that the idea that birth is the defining feature, and so Brahmins are higher than everybody else, is wrong, and that virtue is what is the important thing. And so all four castes, if they develop virtue, can develop higher stages of mind, and therefore are more worthy of respect and should be regarded as higher than all the other people. So now Assalāyana, because he has been defeated and because it's quite embarrassing for him, because as we have seen, all his friends and his teachers and the all respected elders of his community are all there and watching him in this debate, and all of them have pressured him to defeat the Buddha in the debate. Of course, now he has failed, so he feels quite miserable because all of these people are watching. But now the Buddha tries to cheer him up a little. So knowing this, the Blessed One said to him, once Assalāyana, when 7 Brahmin seers were consulting together in leaf huts in the forest, this pernicious view arose in them. Brahmins are the highest caste and so on, the fairest caste, the purest caste, born of Brahma, offspring of Brahma, blah, blah, heirs of Brahma. So that was their view. Now the seer Devala the Dark heard this. Then he arranged his hair and beard, dressed in ochre-colored garments, put on stout sandals, and taking a staff made of gold, he appeared in the courtyard of the 7 Brahmin seers. Then, while walking up and down the courtyard of the 7 Brahmin seers, the seer Devala the Dark spoke thus. Where have those worthy Brahmin seers gone? Where have those worthy Brahmin seers gone? Then the 7 Brahmin seers thought, who is walking up and down in the courtyard of the 7 Brahmin seers like a village loud, speaking thus? Where have those worthy Brahmin seers gone? Where have those worthy Brahmin seers gone? Let us curse him. Then the 7 Brahmin seers cursed the seer Devala the Dark thus. Be ashes, vile one, be ashes, vile one. But the more the 7 Brahmin seers cursed him, the more comely, beautiful, and handsome the seer Devala the Dark became. Then the 7 Brahmin seers thought, our asceticism is in vain, our holy life is fruitless. For formerly, when we cursed anyone thus, be ashes, vile one, be ashes, vile one, he always became ashes. But the more we curse this one, the more comely, beautiful, and handsome he becomes. So here we have a story of the past, a long time in the past, obviously, about 7 Brahmin seers. So this must have been some kind of legend that the Buddha heard, or maybe that was current in the Buddha's time. So obviously, to understand the story, it's important to know a little bit about Brahminism. So for us, when we think about those ancient religions, we all think, oh, this all was a long time ago. But actually, Brahminism existed a long time even before Buddhism existed. So Buddhism has been around for 2,500 years, but even in the Buddha's time, Brahminism was already ancient. So the religion of the Brahmins was already ancient 2,500 years ago. So that religion has existed at least 1,000 years before the Buddha. And originally, those Brahmin practitioners, they were actually people similar to what Buddhist monks and nuns did in the Buddha's time. So people who left their home life, people who went into the forest, into the wilderness, who practiced by themselves, who developed deep stages of meditation, and who developed all those rituals with a deep meaning, because they had like deep insights into how the mind works and so on. So they went into the village, they let go of life in society in order to really deeply focus on their religious practice. And then over time, those practices degraded. People started to live in villages, people started to get married, to have children, have big families. And there wasn't really much actual spiritual development, but people were just practicing the rituals basically as empty rituals and learning the scriptures by heart without actually putting them into practice. So that is the state of the Brahmins in the Buddha's time, which is why then a lot of other spiritual movements emerged, such as Buddhism and Jainism and many of the other spiritual movements that we see in the suttas. Because the Brahmin religion was already quite corrupted and there wasn't really much actual spiritual practice there anymore. But they still have all these stories and these legends of those holy men from the past. So that is what this story talks about those 7 holy men from the past. So 7 Brahmin seers. And they live obviously in the forest, away from society, in leaf huts, very simply. And as they were practicing there, the same view arose. Obviously, it's the same view because this is the view that was then passed down in their scriptures to later generations. And they just learned it. As I mentioned, they just learned this by heart. They didn't actually do any spiritual practice. So obviously, this was then passed down. And that's why the Brahmins in the Buddha's time came to believe this, that Brahmins are the highest caste and so on. So there are those 7 Brahmin seers of old. they have this pernicious view. And then there is another spiritual practitioner called Devala the Dark. And Devala the Dark obviously is not a Brahmin here in the story. He must be from some other kind of caste. And he heard about the view, and then he decided that it was stupid and that he should go and challenge those Brahmin seers. So he went there and he stomped around in their courtyard, and he made a big noise and calling them out. And so obviously that's quite a challenging way of approaching them, because they think that they are the highest and so on. So they feel that everybody should be very respectful. So when they come, they should bow down and be quiet and try not to impose themselves on the Brahmins and, you know, do everything in a very polite way. So, but this guy just, you know, walks in, makes a huge noise, calls them, and stomps around in their courtyard. So they get quite upset and maybe have a little bit of an overreaction, because immediately they curse him and they try to kill him with their curse. So it seems quite an extreme reaction. So they must have been quite triggered by his behavior. And so they curse him, but the curse kind of doesn't work. And the more they curse him, the more benefit he gets, and the more beautiful and the more good looking he becomes. So then the Brahmin ascetics feel that their asceticism is in vain, that their spiritual practice hasn't made any progress, because formerly they had a very powerful mind. They had the actual ability to kill other people with their curses, but in this case, the curse does the exact opposite. So obviously their mental cultivation somehow seems to have disappeared. So they also feel quite dejected, in the same way that Assalāyana feels quite dejected when he was rejected by the Buddha. And now Devala the Dark says to them, "Your asceticism is not in vain, sirs. Your holy life is not fruitless. But, sirs, put away your hatred towards me." "We have put away our hatred towards you, sir. Who are you?" "Have you heard of the seer Devala the Dark, sirs?" "Yes, sir." "I am he, sirs." Then the 7 Brahmin seers went to the seer Devala the Dark and paid homage to him. Then he said to them, "Sirs, I heard that while the 7 Brahmin seers were dwelling in leaf huts in the forest, this pernicious view arose in them. Brahmins are the highest caste, the fairest caste, the purest caste, heirs of Brahma, blah, blah. That is so, sir." So now they actually start talking. After they are unable to kill him, they start talking to him, which is a good idea. Probably they should have done that in the first place before trying to kill other people, but okay. So they find out who he is. Obviously, he's quite famous. They have heard of him before. And suddenly they become really polite and very deferential towards him. They go to him, they bow down to him. So they show some humility. They no longer think that they are the best and that he is some kind of lowlife. But actually now they pay homage to him. So the whole situation completely flips. And then Devala the Dark tells them that he wants to talk with them about their wrong view of being the highest caste. And so Devala the Dark says to them, "But sirs, do you know if the mother who bore you went only with a Brahmin and never with a non-Brahmin?" "No, sir." "But sirs, do you know if your mother's mothers, back to the 7th generation, went only with Brahmins and never with non-Brahmins?" "No, sir." "But sirs, do you know if the father who begot you went only with a Brahmin woman and never with a non-Brahmin woman?" "No, sir." "But sirs, do you know if your father's fathers back to the 7th generation went only with Brahmin women and never with non-Brahmin women?" "No, sirs." "No, sir." So the first thing that Devala the Dark asks is about their lineage. So in order to be a pure Brahmin, you have to be a descendant of a Brahmin mother and a Brahmin father. Traditionally, that's what their scriptures say, back to the 7th generation. So 7th generations back, so father, grandfather, and so on, 7th generation of grandfathers. They all have to have been pure, so they all have to have been together with Brahmin women and their children, for their children to be pure Brahmins. So obviously you cannot prove that, you don't know that, you don't even know what your own parents did, let alone 7 generations back. So this is some kind of random claim that you're a pure Brahmin and that you have a pure lineage of 7 generations, but you can't actually know that. It's just something that you assume, or that you hope for the best, basically, that your parents and your parents' parents and grandparents and so on didn't cheat on each other, but you cannot be sure. So that is what this question is about. You can't know this. So they claim to be pure Brahmins, but who knows? And then Devala the Dark continues, but sirs, do you know how the descent of an embryo comes about? Sir, we know how the descent of an embryo comes about. Here there is the union of the mother and father, and the mother is in season, and the Gandhabba is present. Thus, the descent of an embryo comes about through the union of these 3 things. So now Devala the Dark asks if they know how a baby is made, or how a new person takes rebirth, how the rebirth process works, how a new being basically, how a new baby basically starts being there. And so the Brahmins say, yeah, we know how that happens. Obviously, mother and father have to be together, and it has to be the right time for the mother. And then the being to be reborn, so the Gandhabba means in this case, Gandhabba means the being to be reborn. So somebody who has passed away from the previous state of existence and is now taking rebirth, that being must be present. And so the new embryo is formed through the union of these 3 things. If one of these 3 isn't there, then the embryo doesn't form and doesn't develop. So that's quite spooky when we imagine, I mean, lay people, obviously, not monastics, but lay people, when they want to make a baby, then the Gandhabba is there watching them making the new baby. That's a little bit uncomfortable, I guess. But as the text says, all these 3 things have to be present for the embryo to form. And so then Devala the Dark says, then sirs, do you know for sure whether that Gandhabba is a noble or a Brahmin or a merchant or a worker? Sir, we do not know for sure whether that Gandhabba is a noble or a Brahmin or a merchant or a worker. That being so, sirs, then what are you? That being so, sir, we do not know what we are. So then Devala the Dark says, well, that being to be reborn, obviously it has passed away from some other state of existence before. So do you know if that being to be reborn previously was a Brahmin, or if it was a noble or a worker or a merchant or something else entirely? Could have been a hell being, could have been a ghost, could have been a deva, could have been anything. So do you know for sure that only people who were previously Brahmin take rebirth with a Brahmin couple? And do you know for sure that you were Brahmins in the past lives? And obviously you cannot know that, you cannot be sure in any way. So when you want to make a baby, then obviously you have to take whatever Gandhabba comes to you. You can't really put any condition on that Gandhabba, that being to be reborn, and only attract Brahmin Gandhabbas. Obviously, you have to take whatever Gandhabba is there, is coming. And then, as they say, or then there's the question, who are you? What are you actually? And they truthfully answer, we do not know what we are. Because maybe in this life you're a Brahmin, but the previous life you were a noble, and the life before that you were a ghost, and the life before that you were a deva. So all this is totally fluid. All this is changing the whole time. So all these categories, they only apply for a short period of time, and then they change again. At the very latest, they change when we die and take a new rebirth. But as I mentioned, all these categories can change many times in our lifetime. We can change our nationality. We can change our gender. We can change our sex. We can change so many categories that we fall into now and maybe won't fall into anymore in the future. So basing one's self-worth on any of these categories, or thinking that one is superior because one belongs to one group and not to another, that's total delusion, obviously, and is not in line with the Dhamma, and obviously also not in line with reality. So we do not know what we are. Again, non-self, there is no permanent self, but even on the superficial worldly level, we can't really know who we are. And then the Buddha says, now Assalāyana, even those 7 Brahmin seers, on being pressed and questioned and cross-questioned by the seer Devalata Dark on their own assertion about birth, were unable to support it. But how shall you, on being pressed and cross-questioned by me now, on your assertion about birth, be able to support it? You who rely on the teacher's doctrines are not even fit to be their spoonholder punna. So the Buddha says, well, even those highly accomplished Brahmin seers of the past, the ones who did all the spiritual practice, who made this huge commitment to the practice of the religion, even they couldn't come up with a good argument to counter Devalata Dark. Even they had to acknowledge that they don't know who they are. So how could you, Assalāyana, possibly support this, since you have not done any spiritual practice? You just rely on the scriptures. You have just learned by heart whatever tradition told you without properly reflecting about it yourself. So how could you even, defend this position when even the people who created your religion couldn't defend it? And the Buddha says, you're not even comparable to their spoonholder punna. So punna was, according to the story, punna was the servant of those 7 seers. So obviously punna, being their servant, probably wasn't quite as accomplished as those 7 seers. Maybe being around 7 seers or 7 highly accomplished Brahmins, he did learn some wisdom. And the Buddha says, well, you're not even as accomplished as their servant, since you only since you're so far removed in time and you only rely on scriptural learning. And when this was said, the Brahmin student Assalāyana said to the Blessed One, magnificent Master Gotama, magnificent Master Gotama, and then the usual thing, just as showing a lamp in the dark, turning upright what was overthrown, revealing what was hidden, the usual stuff. He is very happy with the Dhamma teaching, and he says, from today, let Master Gotama remember me as a lay follower who has gone to him for refuge for life. So Assalāyana is actually quite impressed at the end. He has been cheered up a little, and he concedes that he has been defeated. But he's not sad about the defeat. He's actually quite happy to have gotten that Dhamma teaching, and he goes for refuge to the Buddha and the Dhamma and the Sangha, and becomes a lay follower. So happy ending at the end. And so this is the Assalāyana Sutta, debunking all kinds of myths about people who feel superior to others. I hope you enjoyed this sutta, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the live chat, and I will have a look and see if I can answer them. So, hello everyone. Nice to see so many people checking in. Good to see so many friends joining from all over the world. That's great. Is there a question? Sut has shared with us the names of the 7 Brahmin seers. So they're not mentioned here in this particular sutta. They are mentioned in other suttas. The composers of the hymns or the scriptures of the Brahmins. So for people who are interested, these are the names. Other than that, let's see if there's any question. I thought I just saw a question. Here, Robert has a question and he says, is a being's worth determined by its karma? Well, the Buddha here is talking in terms of what the Brahmins, in terms of terminology that the Brahmins use. So a being's worth is kind of a difficult category because we don't really use that in Buddhism. But obviously, karma determines a lot, but we also create our own karma. So karma is not fate. So we ourselves determine if we are good, virtuous people or if we are unvirtuous people, if we make good karma or bad karma, because we ourselves create that karma and we ourselves can decide our own future by making good karma and letting go or abstaining from making bad karma. But obviously, we should respect people more who are good people, who are virtuous people, because those are people that can teach us and those are people that can lead us onward towards a good rebirth and especially to the practice of Dhamma and also ultimately to full liberation, arahantship, and so on. So obviously, in that sense, we can say the Buddha was the worthiest being because he discovered the path, he taught us, he showed us the way, he helps us to overcome suffering. So in that case, we can say, like in that sense, we can say that sort of the development of virtue and the development of the higher stages of the path, the development of samadhi, of wisdom, and so on, that kind of determines the respect that we should show to a being, which doesn't mean that we should disrespect people who are bad people or who are unvirtuous people. We can still but like we still should practice, for example, metta and karuna, so loving kindness and compassion towards all beings. So it's not that we should try to harm unvirtuous beings or anything like this, but obviously we need to respect beings more that are more advanced than we are ourselves. Pia and Indira say, what is the main teaching of the sutta? I think the main teaching is that there is no grounds for making those distinctions and differences between people based on birth or based on any artificial exterior marker. So the main teaching of the sutta is that all beings or all human beings are able to develop virtuous behavior, and since all human beings are able to develop virtuous behavior, all humans have the potential to develop full liberation, arahantship, and we can't say that one group of humans is more able to make progress on the path than others. For example, as the Brahmin said, we are the purest and the highest, and only we can attain union with Brahma. But for Buddhism, any kind of person who wants to practice the path can make progress on the Buddhist path. I think that is the main teaching. And then Sud has another question. Perhaps we can use the same argument in this day and age to bring to light the futility of even having different groups and nations and national identity, which is pretty much fake as well. So, well, for sure, all kinds of identity are fake. As you all know, identity view is one of the fetters that we let go at stream entry. And obviously, eventually at arahantship, we realize non-self. So once we realize non-self, even the last traces of any kind of identity that we could cling to are eradicated. So obviously, all these categories are false. They're not based in actual reality, but in some way, we still use them in our daily life. So some of them are actually harmful, and those that are actually harmful and are used to discriminate against others or to create conflict between groups, those harmful ones, obviously are things that we should make an effort to overcome. Some of them are quite benign, some of them are quite harmless. And I mean, ultimately, not everybody is going to be enlightened. Most people just live in conventional reality. And then obviously, in order to communicate with other people, we have to use those words and those phrases. And we have to sort of subscribe to the way society works in some way, because we still have to survive in this human world. So those categories that aren't actually harmful, I think, there's no point fighting against this, because the world is just as it is. And also, we live in the human realm. This is not a Deva realm. The human realm is still a realm that has relatively much suffering. So where we can try our best to reduce suffering and to minimize suffering for ourselves and for others, this is never going to be a paradise. So, and there's always going to be delusion in the human realm, because as long as we're not enlightened, we just have delusion. And most people are not even practicing the Dhamma, so they're not even trying to overcome delusion. And as long as we have delusion, all these different groups and nations and identities will still be there. So that seems to have been the last question for today. So let's finish our sutta discussion for today with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So as I mentioned in the beginning, there is no sutta class next week because I have another commitment. So I hope you all have a good rest of the day. Have a good week, and I will see you all in 2 weeks' time. Take care.